Releasing criminals early seems to be the government's latest idea to make space in the already overcrowded prison system and the heavily backlogged criminal justice system so they can make space for those that have been caught up in the riots of the recent weeks or posting anything online that's likely to stir up hatred. It really is worse than you might already think. So if you want a raw and brutal analysis of what's going on with an application of the law by a practicing barrister, please do consider subscribing to my channel as a fresh alternative to the mainstream media, because I'll tell you things that you might not read elsewhere. And for that, stay tuned. Welcome back to the channel. So I'm giving you exactly as it is here. This new scheme, Operation Early Dawn, is a fancy way of saying letting criminals out early. Allow me to explain. So there's two bits that I'm going to point you to here. One is something from the Law Society, which was back from March, which is talking about the backlog in the criminal justice system, which is why this is worse than you might already think. Another one which tells you about what Operation Early Dawn is, and then what they've told the press to tell you about it. So we'll cover all of those in turn. First of all, I'll talk about what this operation is in its overview. Now, this says that on Monday, today, the prison service has reactivated an emergency measure called Operation Early Dawn to deal with the worsening problem of the prison population. In other words, they are full. So if they want to send anyone else to prison, they need to make space. The only way to make space in the prison is by kicking somebody out. One in, one out was the way that I heard it phrased on an interview that I watched earlier today. It says defendants will be summoned to magistrates' court only when it's confirmed that a cell in the prison estate is ready for them. Should they be remanded into custody? Because obviously if they go into the magistrate's court and they are likely to be sent to prison, they might be remanded into custody, and so they need to go somewhere. So there's three broad places they can go. There's the prison itself. There's the pre-prison bit, which is usually a section of the prison which is held for people that are remanded into custody, or police prison cells, police custody cells. It says they will be held in a police station until they're summoned to court. It says many magistrates' court cases will be delayed, which is not news, believe me. Practitioners will not know if their client's case will be delayed for sure until they get there, which is already a bad situation as it is, without it being made even worse by further crowding and further delays. The Law Society says we understand priority will be given to defendants in the most serious cases, meaning defendants who are not prioritised will be released on police bail. So they'll just let them go rather than keep them in the police cell and rather than produce them to court because there's no space in the prison. Now, moving to the official position on this, the process activated to manage prisoner movements, a temporary measure to manage pressures in prisons in the north of England has been reactivated following long-standing capacity failures and recent outbreaks of far-right disorder. Now, I somewhat disagree with the use of far-right disorder here because obviously it is not just far-right disorder, and even those that are, let's say, right-wing, it's not necessarily far-right. It might be those that associate themselves with right-wing views. But let's not get into the politics of that here. I think this should have been a neutral statement rather than a far-right disorder comment on this page. But that's just my personal view. Don't often give you my personal view, but that was not a very big one to give, so there it is. I think that should have been left neutral, which is I think how that should be put across. But if you do want my personal opinions, you'll find some of those over on Black Belt Secrets, my other channel linked in the description below. And subscribe to my other channel, Daniel Shansmith, while you're down there. It says, in recent weeks, prisons in the north of England have seen hundreds of people enter the prison estate after the government took decisive action to tackle violent thuggery on our streets. Now, make no mistake, it's right that those that have been smashing up shops and throwing bricks at the police and all this sort of stuff, it's right that they are dealt with. It's right that they are dealt with quickly, robustly, severely, and etc. None of that I've got a problem with. This, however, this has exacerbated and left many people exasperated, learn the difference, long-standing capacity issues in the prisons, which have been operating at critical levels for the last several years. That's something I'll come back to, which is why I think it's worse than many of you might already think. To manage these pressures, HM Prison and Probation Service has reactivated an existing contingency mechanism, Operation Early Dawn, providing extra oversight of prisoner transfers between the police, the courts and custody, which is what I mentioned earlier. This means that offenders will be summoned to magistrates court only when it's confirmed that a cell in the prison estate is ready for them, should they be remanded into custody. They will be held in a police station until they can be summoned to court. The activation of Operation Early Dawn helps to manage prisoners' capacity, pressure felt in the short term in the small number of regions. This action is to be taken to ensure that we always have enough prison spaces to lock up those who choose to break the law. But it's how this is all decided and how the space is made that's of real importance here. Now, I'll come back to that in a moment. First of all, just to tell you why this is even worse than most people already think. Now, for those of you that don't know, I'll forgive you for knowing. There's no reason that you would know unless you're a lawyer or part of the system, but most people don't know just how severe the backlogs are in the criminal justice system. Unless, of course, you've read books by The Secret Barrister, which I'll link in the description below. Fantastic read. Go and check that out. It is an affiliate link, full disclosure, but go and check it out. It's a fantastic read. I bought it myself with my own money, etc. Now, figures published as of March of this year says that the Crown Court backlog has reached 67,500 cases by December. The backlog, those are cases that are still waiting to be heard. 67,500 cases, which is 8% higher than the year before, which was 62,000. 18,000 of those have been outstanding for a year or more. So someone has been waiting. So you've got two things going on here. You've got somebody who is charged and they are either guilty or not guilty, and they won't know until they've been to trial at the Crown Court. And you've got the complainant who would be victim. If the accused is found guilty, they obviously then termed a victim, to use the proper terms. They are then waiting for over a year for this case to come to court. This includes also 6,500 cases which have been outstanding for 2 years or more. And it gets even worse when we look at the magistrates' backlog, which has also increased by 7% on the previous quarter, at 370,000 cases by the end of December 2023. So you add all of those up, and how many hours they take and all of the time and the cost and everything else at running those, that is a substantial backlog. And that is before they say prisons are full. So even if only half of all of these cases actually end up with someone going to prison, we're talking hundreds of thousands of prison spaces that we don't have, apparently. And so the way that they are now looking at relieving those spaces, bearing in mind, I heard a figure of 500 spaces floated around now to make space. Now, when I say that against the backlog here, that doesn't sound like a lot of spaces. 500 spaces, given the backlog that we've got, is not very much. But how are they going to make space? And that is what Operation Early Dawn is in part to entail. Note to editors here. So I'm not an editor. I'm not a news company. I'm just bringing you the raw truth of what this looks like so you can think of it for yourself. This is supposed to be open democracy, open government, and everything else. This says here, as part of a long-term plan to address the capacity crisis, the government is temporarily reducing the proportion of certain custodial sentences served in prison from 50% to 40%. Allow me to explain. If you get a 5-year prison sentence, you will typically serve half in custody and half on license. So you'll spend 2.5 years in custody, 50%, and 2.5 years on license, the other 50%. So that's the 5-year sentence. The bit on license means if you do anything else wrong in that time, you can be recalled to prison, not just for any new offence, but the original offence for which you served half in the first place. So if you're on license for 2.5 years, then you could potentially go back to prison for the remainder of the sentence that you didn't serve the first time round. That's where the 50% comes from. Now, what they're proposing is to reduce that 50% to 40%. So shaving 10% off it doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you think of how many prisoners are already over that 40% threshold, but not quite 50% threshold, that's a lot of spaces they can then free up. Now, to be fair, here is something that a lot of people, I think, have misinterpreted and now think that lots of really serious violent offenders are now going to be released early. That's not necessarily the case, to be fair, but let's read on. It says, these measures, which come into force in September and October, which gives time and everything else, which includes important safeguards and exemptions, keep the public safe, and clear release plans to manage them safely in the community, obviously going to be tracked and monitored and so on. It says, and this is the clear distinction which a lot of people will misunderstand or not appreciate here, is that sentences for terrorism, sex offences, serious violence offences of 4 years or more will be automatically excluded. And in an important distinction from the end of custody supervised licence scheme, the early release of prisoners, offenders in prison for domestic abuse related crimes will also be excluded. So those include stalking offences, controlling or coercive control, intimate or family relationships, non-fatal strangulation and suffocation, breach of restraining order, non-molestation order, and domestic abuse protection orders. So those will be excluded. And so, of course, serious violent offences for 4 years or more is a very broad spectrum, so encompasses everything such as GBH, etc. Any of those serious violence offences will be included, any sex offences, but so long as they are 4 years or more. But that does mean that there's a lot of prisoners that have received a custodial sentence of under 4 years will be eligible for early release, albeit only by 10% of what they would have originally served. So in one sense, it's not quite as bad as a lot of people would have originally thought, because the most serious offenders will not be eligible for early release. And those that are, it's only that 10% window, between 40 and 50%. But it does allow for reasonable numbers to free up spaces so that new people can take their place if they've been convicted of new offences. Now, many people will disagree with the new offences that people have been sentenced to custodial terms for, but that is a topic for another day. And furthermore, anyone released will be strictly monitored on licence by the probation service through measures that it can include electronic tagging and curfews. They will face being recalled to prison if they breach any of the licence conditions, which they would anyway. They would be recalled to prison if they breach licence conditions in normal circumstances, and so they would here too. The new rules will also not apply to most serious offenders, as we just discussed, who are already either 2/3 of their sentence behind bars or have their release determined by the parole board. And alongside the changes to early release, the government will build the prisons the country needs, review how sentencing and criminal justice works, and recruit an additional 1,000 probation officers, because they'll obviously have to deal with all of those with the increased numbers and the increased burden on the administration and dealing with prisoners and their release and their monitoring and so on. But the bit that I think most of you probably didn't appreciate is just how many cases are in the backlog here. This is a serious amount of cases in the backlog, none of which are obviously going away, but they are being added to by recent events and thousands more that are likely to be charged in connection with all of the recent events. So that hopefully dispels a lot of misunderstanding, but does also give you an understanding of what's going on. They are literally planning to release certain offenders early to make space for those that have been charged recently. So that is the raw truth. That is exactly what's happening. Only a sprinkling of opinion in that I think that the press release should have been neutrally worded rather than to blame it all on far right. Now, don't shoot the messenger here. I don't want people in the comments saying that I'm far right for saying that this shouldn't say far right and all that sort of nonsense. I just think that this press release should be neutral and things like this should be neutral, because there were arguments on both sides of this. There's always two sides to a story. There's always people doing something wrong on both sides. One side might be doing more wrong than the other. I'm not going to debate that, and I'm not going to give my opinion on that. It's impossible for anyone to determine, quite frankly. But there was a lot of disorder, and a lot of people have been charged, and a lot of people will go to prison. And so this is what they're doing about it. They are literally making space by releasing people early. That's how they're doing it. So this is straight from the horse's mouth and with a sprinkling of explanation from me. If you found that useful, please do consider subscribing and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on future videos. And if you do want my personal opinions, please do also check out Black Belt Secrets, linked in the description below, where I do give you my opinions sometimes, which they are heavily caveated as my personal opinion and not designed to incite anyone into any kind of hatred or violence, you understand? And if you want to learn how to manage your finances better and create wealth and make money, my other channel, Daniel Smith, is linked below as well. So with that, I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.